Hi guys, happy Wednesday. Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be doing our deeper discussion of this book, The Sword of Destiny by Andrzej Sapkowski. Please forgive me for any rotor noises you hear coming from the window. Apparently London has decided that it's a brilliant time just to have all the air traffic in the world go through, which probably was more of an issue on the last video that I did. Hopefully they'll have calmed down just now. Right, so we're going to be going through basically now the stories one by one and just discussing those a little bit more in detail. Obviously this is going to have more spoilers and things in there, so if that's something you're worried about, you might not want to watch this video until you've read the book. Or if you don't care, obviously go ahead and watch it. So Story 1, The Bounds of Reason. It's an interesting story. It's one of those that I considered a bit fillery when I was talking about it in my review. Basically, the story here is that Geralt somehow gets involved on a dragon hunt, even though he doesn't hunt dragons. Mainly so he can go and see Yennefer after they've split up. Something happened to them between the end of The Last Wish and this one. We never really find out what exactly happened, but I think we can gather that just when they lived together in between those times, it wasn't a good time. So they split up. Yennefer's all angry at Geralt, but there were some really, really great character moments in this story. When people start questioning Geralt as like, why are you even here? You know, you don't hunt dragons. You don't want to get involved in this. Yennefer's told you to fuck off. And Geralt just comes out with like this thing that just melted my cold heart. And he says, you know, at least here, I have people to talk to that won't spit at me and call me a freak. You know, and that's like, he just wants to hang out with his bros. Like, basically, like, Geralt, all he wants to do at this point in time is just, you know, hang out with his friends, have a good time, have a little journey, and not hunt a dragon. Because he doesn't hunt dragons. That's one of the things we learn about the world, is that dragons exist, but they're considered like an intelligent species. Geralt doesn't hunt the sort of intelligent species and stuff. There is a lot of different characters that get introduced that could pop up again. The Crinford Reavers are they're characters that pop up in the video games in Witcher 2, which I thought was interesting because I'd obviously played that game before this. And they make allusions to this story, obviously, and this leads to those sort of weird thing. They tie Yennefer to a wheel of a wagon and they rip her top off for some reason, and Dandelion keeps talking about her tits. It's really sort of uncomfortable. It makes no sense. Like, it didn't need to happen, which is why it's sort of weird. Like, I would accept, like, fine, tie her to the wheel and gag her, whatever. Like, should you want to get her out of the way, but you don't need to like do that. I think Sapkowski just sort of had this moment where he's like, do you know what would be really fun is if I could describe Yennefer's boobs, and then like, it was not necessary, kind of weird, a bit off-putting. But otherwise the story was pretty good. Villain Trettenmeth is the golden dragon, and if you were wondering how to pronounce it, I think that's right, Villain Trettenmeth. Or Villain Trettenmeth, I don't know what I'm saying, but he's three jackdaws. He's a great character. Golden Dragon, goes around, has a good time. He gets along all right with humans, even though most dragons don't. There's a lot of good talk in this about the differentials between order and chaos and what Geralt's role is in the fight between good and evil. Like, he talks about how he doesn't want to be put on either side of a palace. He doesn't want to be put on one side of a palisade in a war that's been going on long before him and long after he'll be gone. And everyone else seems to want to categorize him in some way, and he doesn't see himself like that. So it's very interesting stuff from a character perspective, from a pacing perspective and overall story. Yeah, huh. Well, yeah, okay, whatever. We could probably have included a lot of this stuff elsewhere, and it wouldn't have been that big a deal. Second story, A Shard of Ice. This one is an interesting one because it really sort of goes into Geralt and Yennefer's relationship more. And it's one of those things that it's got me sort of scratching my head as to obviously Geralt is bound by fate to Yennefer after the events of what happened in The Last Wish, the story The Last Wish. All of that happened and sort of linked their fates together is basically what we learn from it. And we get an idea of why, Yennefer is not able to coexist with Geralt. Geralt is he's kind of like a homebody. He doesn't want to do much of anything. And Yennefer is sort of really this driven person in achieving her goals. And she is essentially she's two-timing Geralt. And it's sort of loathsome of her to do. And eventually she just decides, you know what, I love both of these people the same. I'm just gonna fuck off and stop hurting them both. And then Geralt gets all angry and he's like, I'm gonna go fucking fight this guy. I'm just gonna have a fight to the death with him because why not? Might as well. One of us will die, and the other one will get to be with Yennefer when she calms down from having her other potential lover murdered. So that was all. It's all interesting stuff, It speaks to a lot of what I talked about in my my character study for Geralt. About how he sees himself internally and how other people see him, and sort of what his role is in life. There's a lot of fun bits in here. There's a fun fight scene where this guy is like, I'm going to test you, Witcher. I'm going to prove that you're not all that scary. You're all bark and no bite. And then Geralt just sort of walks up to him the guy tries to ambush him in an alleyway. Geralt just walks, doesn't even stop, and just punches him straight in the face, which was interesting. It was a good comedy beat. I enjoyed it. It's a good story. This one definitely worth checking out. The third one, Eternal Flame. Now this is the one that I think we could have just gotten rid of the easiest. This one takes place after Geralt has split up with Yennefer again, and he goes to Novigrad, which if you've played The Witcher 3, this story will resonate a lot with you, I think, because there's a huge section of the game in Novigrad, and there's a lot of references to this particular story. This is the introduction of Dudu Biebervelt, who is a Doppler, he's like a doppelganger, like a changeling. So he can transform himself, and he transforms himself into this merchant, and over the course of 2 days makes millions of gold. He becomes like a super rich guy using the identity of this other dude. And there's a running theme through there of Geralt being annoyed because his new jacket gets ripped. And Dandelion's there and he's doing stuff. He's gotten involved with this other woman. Who's now the air traffic again. But he's getting involved with this woman who basically just wants to hit him with a frying pan. It's essentially just a long comedy story. It was quite fun in and of itself, but it didn't really add anything character development wise or really sort of plot wise. Could have done without it really in the book as a whole. I think it would have been better placed if it came after the next story, because the next story is one that just completely gutted me from an emotional perspective, and that is A Little Sacrifice. This is the story that made Dandelion really my favourite character, because it's all about how Geralt he gets involved with, it's essentially there's a little bit of a Little Mermaid retelling in there, because obviously Sapkowski has to sprinkle in those fairy tale twisting fairy tales to reality sort of thing. So basically, Geralt's hired to translate for this Duke to try and woo a mermaid, and it doesn't really go very well. But and in the course of these adventures, Geralt is introduced to one of Dandelion's contemporaries, which is a poet named Essie Devon, otherwise known as Little Eye, who Geralt sort of is sort of interested in, but it's made kind of clear that he doesn't really have feelings for her romantically. He is just sort of kind of starts using her as a rebound from Yennefer, but then stops himself because he thinks, it's not fair to do that. What am I even doing? I've not got any interest in doing that. I'm just being an idiot. But then the twist is that Essie sort of does have a crush on Geralt, and they sort of have a mini relationship, essentially just to make her happy, and Geralt doesn't really understand why he would need to do that. And there's all these nice little bits of Dandelion being like, we have to get her a birthday present because it's her birthday, and Geralt doesn't understand why you would even bother doing that. So Dandelion really comes into his own in this story as a character who is making people's lives better through the way he is. It's easy to see Dandelion as this weird, philandering sort of jerk who there's no point in him being around because he's a coward, he doesn't fight and stuff. But he really humanizes Geralt, and he really adds that human element to the story because he's able to tap into those emotions and really bring Geralt, help Geralt contextualize things that maybe he doesn't quite understand, and he allows us to have a bit of fun, which is good because the ending of this story is just the last 2 pages of this are like probably some of the best writing Sapkowski's done in the series. Really strong emotional resonance there, and it's tragic. It is a tragic tale. Which is why I think you could have moved Eternal Flame to after this, just to lighten the mood a little bit. The next story is The Sword of Destiny, which is probably probably the most important one. As you know, I don't know. It's a toss-up between this one and the next one as to which is most important going into the saga. The Sword of Destiny is basically the introduction to Ciri. Geralt meets a girl in the woods who turns out to be Cirilla, who's the Princess of Cintra. And if you remember from The Last Wish, he'd made the current princess and Dunny, the urchin, swear their firstborn child to him, essentially through trickery. And this is that child. And he finds out about this and he gets kind of nervous and he doesn't really buy into the whole destiny thing and he tries to hide away from it, but he rescues her from becoming a dryad, which is a whole thing. But the meat of the story is basically Geralt meeting Ciri and protecting her, which is a good setup for how their relationship begins going into the saga. And the last story is something more, which is really where the themes of the previous one are continued. I think this is probably the most direct continuation from one story to another in terms of theme and tone. Ciri in this one doesn't play as big a feature. The arc of this one is that Geralt is injured in a fight and he's hallucinating all these things and talking about, like, he's remembering basically different chats he's had with different characters about destiny. There's some scenes with Yennefer and their relationship and how she doesn't want the whole thing to start over again, but Geralt does, sort of. It's a bit of back and forth. Like, the whole Yennefer-Geralt romance doesn't interest me as much as the rest of the story. So that's there, but then the bigger issue is Geralt is still shirking his sort of responsibility. He tempted fate and destiny by essentially tricking them into giving him this child. And now the time has come to pay the piper on it. He's sort of got cold feet and he doesn't want to get involved with that. At this point in this story, he doesn't know. Well, he does. it's sort of, there's flashbacks. So he does know that Ciri is the Destiny Child, but there's a flashback to a time when he doesn't understand that. So it flashes back to him in Sintra, talking to Calanthe, who's the current queen of Sintra, and he's there, and she's like, well, you know, we've got all these children, you have to pick one, and that'll be how you prove that destiny is the case, and you can take the child. And we learn a lot more here about how witches are made and what they go through and stuff, which is all interesting world building things. But ultimately, Geralt says he doesn't want to, and he leaves. He says, I don't believe in destiny. I'm not going to mess around with it. I'm leaving. So he leaves, and then towards the very end of the story, we learn that there's been a big war with Nilfgaard, which is like an empire. We don't learn a lot about Nilfgaard in this book. They come a lot more into prominence in the main series. But I think that's actually something I probably should have mentioned in the review. Sapkowski is not great at establishing the different kingdoms and how they relate to each other. Because I get what he's doing is that he's made this real big sprawling medieval world where all of these little tiny fists of land are ruled by different people, and the rulers are all interchangeable, and it doesn't really make that much of a difference. But he doesn't really set up the northern kingdoms as opposed to Nilfgaard. It's not really set up how they relate to each other. So when it's like, oh, Nilfgaard's invading, like, it's one of those moments where we kind of shrug. We don't really know what any of that means, which is why I think this book actually would work better if it had come out in the order it was published in English. And I think if you were going to dip into the series, if you haven't started it yet, I suggest actually maybe saving this one until after you have read Baptism of Fire. So read this one fifth, because you'll get a lot more context as to what's being discussed in that last story, and it will sort of make more sense to you. Obviously, I didn't find it that bad because I'd read it before and stuff, but if you don't really know who Nilfgaard is, that's not really going to be hugely important to you. There's a really nice scene with Geralt having a hallucination on a hill in this one, where he has a little chat with Death, which is interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of good stuff basically through the whole book. There's just a few things here or there that I think could have been done without, and I think we could have changed around the order of some of the things just to make it a little bit stronger. But ultimately, yeah, top marks. Well, not top marks, second from top marks, 4 stars, mate. Yeah, so this one's pretty good. It's really good. So yeah, go out and read Sword of Destiny if you want to. If you haven't started the Witcher series yet, actually maybe hold off on it. But if you have already read it, then good. And I'll see you for the next chat of which will be of Blood of Elves. So I'll see you then. Bye bye.